Since the beginning, humans have been telling stories, not just as entertainment, but as a way to understand themselves, a way to understand the world around them more fully. And I think we've come a long way, maybe in some ways not, since that first story. But we're still using story as a powerful tool.
Your journey to the divine is an intimate exploration of self, where you are both the seeker and the source of enlightenment. I, Jessica Paschke, invite you to break free from the ordinary, to reforge your spiritual path with courage, curiosity, and audacity. Unleash the power of your spiritual connection, stepping into a purpose-driven life free of have-tos and shoulds. Join me on this profound exploration of rediscovery, where you'll not only redefine your own spiritual practice, but also inspire a collective awakening. Welcome to Reclaiming Our Spirit.
How many stories can one lifetime hold? And which story is the real story? So today, we're exploring the complicated nature of our personal stories and why they're such an incredibly important part of our spiritual journey. I am so excited to be back here. And for those of you who don't know, I went to the UK for a vacation and for business. So it was a multi-part. And I got to meet someone that I've known and talked with multiple times, like messaged multiple times a day. We talk every week, but I'd never met in person. Isn't that the interesting part of this world that we're so connected in, that we can create these amazing friendships, these friendships that are just like everything, that are supportive, that are nurturing, but have never met them in person. Melissa Amos, if you listen to the beginning of the season, you'll have heard her chat about intuition. I have known her since I think 2016, and I've never met her in person, like in real life. It was time. It's 2024. We're both a part of this business thing. There was a retreat, a mastermind retreat that was happening in the UK. She lives in the UK. And I said, okay, I'm coming over. We're going to meet, we're going to hang out, and then we're going to go to this retreat. And I can't even tell you how many million bazillion sparks of joys happened on that trip to the UK. It was amazing. London was fantastic. The retreat was amazing. But one of the things that just I loved the absolute most was, for whatever reason, Melissa and I could not sleep in the mornings at the retreat. We could not. We kept getting up super early, and everyone was either still asleep or doing their own thing. And nothing really started until 10 o'clock to accommodate for everyone and when they get up and how they move through the world. And we'd be like awake at 6, staring at the ceiling. And so the very first day that we got there, we drove together. She's like, "Are you awake?" And I'm like, "I'm 100% awake." And she's like, "Let's go find coffee." I said, "Okay." So we ventured out. We were staying in this carriage house, and we walked into town, and we would get our coffee, and we would sit and we would chat every morning of the retreat. And then we would walk back and chat some more and talk. And I cannot tell you on a soul level how wonderful it was to just be able to give her a hug, be able to sit there with her across the table. I mean, I can't wait for the next time. I hope there were a lot of next times. I wish I lived next door so we could walk every day and get coffee every day. But it was a spark of joy I looked forward to every single day. We're going to get up, we're going to go for a walk, we're going to have a cup of coffee together, and we're going to walk back. And it was just like the most magnificent way to start a day. And we would chat about all the things. We would chat about work, we would chat about life, we would chat about where we were going and what we wanted to do and where we wanted to travel. We would just chat like friends who've known each other for almost 10 years, 8 years. And it was just beyond lovely, and a huge spark of joy in that trip. And there were so many other sparks of joy. And I will talk about those other sparks too, of course. But that one definitely spark of joy. And we always seemed to have somewhat of an adventure when we went out. Sometimes we couldn't get out of what felt like a compound because they had all these gates, and sometimes the gate would open, sometimes they'd be locked shut. So sometimes we'd be just about ready to scale the wall and we'd get the gate to open. Or we'd decide that we'd take a less busy road back and end up walking through like mud, and not even like a puddle, but like mud, coming back covered in mud. Lots of laughs, because we both like to laugh. So thank you, Melissa, for being my spark of joy on that amazing trip. Definitely one of the highlights to be able to hug you in person. So let's get back to the topic of today, stories. I want to talk about stories. Since the beginning, humans have been telling stories, not just as entertainment, but as a way to understand themselves, a way to understand the world around them more fully. And I think we've come a long way, maybe in some ways not, since that first story. But we're still using story as a powerful tool to explain the why we're here, to connect to ourselves, to connect to our soul, to connect to our spirit. We're using it to understand all of those things more fully. And I have been fascinated by stories since I was a child. I read all the time, all the time. I mean, piles and piles and piles of books. You had to actually pull the book out of my hand. I was probably one of the very few children that needed to be nudged to not read because I loved getting lost in the story. There was just something about that entering a world, and having it come to life in my mind, having it be so vivid and so different than what I was living. It was like a way to understand a different perspective, a way to, for a moment while I was reading that book, move through the world in a different way. And that capability is available to us outside of a book with our own personal story. And it's books that really inspired me, really kind of lit that fire, ignited that fire in me when it came to understanding people's stories as a psychic, as a medium, hearing stories of crossed over loved ones, and as a coach, hearing everyone's stories, as a teacher and a mentor, getting to hear stories in groups and spaces. I loved all of those things. I love a story. I love to hear who people are and where they've come from and what they're doing now and where they're going. This love of stories really was the inspiration for one of my most favorite things I'm doing right now, which is this small group class called Odyssey. It's not even a class, it's a small group space, for lack of a better term. And it's called Odyssey. And it's funny because when I wanted to do this, I had a little bit of an idea that I wanted to do something in a small group with just like maybe 7 or 8 people, really intimate, really get to know each other, spend time with each other. And the word Odyssey dropped in. And at first I was like, okay, I love the name. Awesome. What does it mean? I'm going to drop that outline in there too, Spirit? They did, kind of. They showed me this image of ships sailing into the unknown or sailing into their unknown. Actually, we don't ever really go into the unknown because somebody is already there. It's already there known. We're just going someplace that we aren't familiar with. But somebody has already done that, is already there, already exists, already thrives, and we're just experiencing it for the first time. So while it feels like the unknown, somebody actually knows that space. And I think that's going to come into play later in our conversation today. But it really did remind me of those epic old mythological tales. A lot of people refer to it as the hero's journey, where it's the adventure, the ups, the downs, the challenges, the wins, and then doing some amazing feat and then coming back home, this hero, this epic hero, having this powerful story, the possibility of it all. And I was like, awesome, I love it. Can I have the outline for that, please? They weren't so easy. It took me a while. It took me months actually to come up with that outline. Because I really wanted to know, like, how do we tap into that magic of a story? The stories that we read, the worlds that are so vivid in our mind and what comes to life on those pages. And how do we tap into that and translate that into our own story? Would it be possible to look at our story in a way that we could be the main character and the author at the same time? Which I know the answer is yes. I knew the answer was yes at that time. I'd done it. But how could we look at that past and that present and that future that is yet to come, unknown to us, yet to come? How could we do that all at once? And there's one thing about having an idea in your head and another about bringing it into fruition and then being able to explain it to other people across from you. That is always the challenge. And if you teach anything, you know that to be true. Great idea. How do I bring it to fruition? And so I had to really sit and ponder it. for a while and figure out. I mean, I knew it was possible. I just wanted to make sure. I was so excited about it. I wanted to make sure that it got its full chance to be what it wanted to be. So before we dive in, though, I want to just clarify what I mean when I say the word story, because there's a lot of different ways you can define that. And within the spiritual spaces, there's a lot of different ways that it's defined. There's a variety. And this is by no means the only one way to use this term. I'm just going to be referencing it throughout our shared conversation together in these specific ways. So I just want to be clear on what I'm saying when I say story. So sometimes when you hear people say story, they're often in the context of that's just the story you're telling yourself. And when they say it in that context, that's just the story you're telling yourself, they're talking about this idea of the tall tales that we tell ourselves or the limiting beliefs that we carry around with ourselves. And how these stories, right? The tall tales can sometimes limit us from reaching our full potential. These are things that maybe we've experienced in the past or we've picked up in the past or it's been passed down. The stories that we tell ourselves that maybe aren't so helpful, maybe aren't so supportive. But then there's another aspect of story. That's what I want to focus on today is the power of our story. So rather than push it aside or box it up or be judgmental and look back at our story and think, oh, it's just a story I'm telling myself at this moment. It's not really true. When in fact, it probably did indeed happen to us. It's not the fact of whether it happened or not happened, whether it's true or not. It's what it's doing in our present moment that really is the most important. But it's about looking at this idea of a story and asking it, what does our own personal story have to tell us? And how can that past story, our present story, and our future story all connect? So we can really tap into this idea of story as a powerful tool in our toolbox. Because at the heart of it all, what do stories really do? They link those things. A really good story takes you from the past and they weave the present in and the future in, and they don't eliminate a single one. And when we just look at the aspect of story as in tall tale or limiting belief, we sort of miss that aspect of the conversation. It's almost like in an attempt to rewrite ourselves. We ignore the most important part, the sum of the whole, the everything that gives us meaning, all three of those aspects. One of the people who are participating in Odyssey described it like the past and the future fold over into the present and it touches the present. And I freaking love that so much. It's a brilliant way of describing it, like the visual of the two coming over the top. It was a great way to describe it because our stories are not told in a void. Our present story is going to be touched by our past, and it's going to be touched by the future that we want to co-create, the what comes next. And we're going to leap off the past and the present to make that future story come to life. But that future story, even if it hasn't come to life yet, even if it's still in the unknown, affects how we move through the present. The decisions are that we make, the choices that we make, the places that we go, what we do, what we think, what we say, what we feel, it all affects that. Because this is what I was pondering. How do I describe this in a way that will make sense to brains everywhere for Odyssey? So I like to describe it as like this idea of a map. So a map can show us where we've been, where we are, and where we could possibly go with it. I like it. Sort of gives our brain an anchor, And it gives us ideas that, we're journeying along here and maybe, where are we going? What direction have we pointed ourselves? Where is our compass pointing? Are we pointing towards the sea monsters off in the margins, or are we actually going to, reach our destination where we want to go? Right? How do we want to make that happen? And this idea of a map made it, I think, infinitely easier to sort of take all of those parts, that past, present, and future, and look at it all at once. Our map, maybe unlike a roadmap, is going to tell the story of our experiences. It's going to have our tall tales on there. It's going to have who we want to become. Even if part of that map is still in the unknown, even if we don't have the clarity of what that map looks like, specifically, we know that it exists. There is space on the paper for it to exist. And as we move forward, we get to see a little bit more of what that looks like. It's almost as if it's magically writing itself as we move forward. It's magically coming to life. And the beautiful part about thinking it as a map is it gives us the power of choice. If we're hanging out, we're coming from the past and we're hanging out in the present, we know where we want to go, and we start making choices and actions, and our map starts to create a route that isn't exactly where we want to go. And when you look forward, you're like, oh, that's actually not where I intended to go. I didn't realize what I was doing in this present moment was going to be taking me into those waters with the dragons and the monsters. Let's make a hard right turn. let's let's steer. Let's steer. And so we use this map to help us figure out how we want to direct our story. Our story is the map. How do we want to direct our story? How do we want to make decisions, do things that can lead us forward, to lead us into the next place? So really at its core is the map asks us, who are we? Who am I? That essential question. Who am I? This idea of story or map or however you want to look at it helps us to answer that. Who am I? And who do I want to be? And where have I been? A lot of times in spiritual spaces, intuitive development classes, you'll hear the phrase, know thyself. Melissa and I mentioned it on one of the beginning episodes of this season. I say it a bazillion times over. Probably people are annoyed with me now. Know thyself. But it's so true. If you don't know who you are, who you were, who you will be, then it's very hard to consciously and intentionally co-create things in your life because you don't have the clarity that you need to understand your full story. Our stories shape our identities. They shape our perceptions of ourselves, of the world around us, of our relationships, of what we do for our work or our businesses. And if we are not aware of the story that we're telling, not in a limiting belief, tall tale kind of sense, but literally in the sense of what story are we creating, then we're missing out on an opportunity to step more fully and more intentionally into a life of meaning. And this doesn't mean that, oh my gosh, I haven't known my story. I haven't sat down. I haven't looked at this and I've wasted my life. Not at all. Not at all. We're all doing this on some level, whether it's conscious or not. We're always reflecting on our story. I think when we make space to intentionally do it, it's infinitely more powerful, but we're all doing it on some level. So you've already been doing it. Now you're just going to bring it to the forefront of your awareness. Now you're going to avoid kind of one of those dangers of any travel. There's always dangers on the path. Now you're going to avoid the danger of dismissing your story. So rather than just blowing yourself off and saying, oh, that's just a story I'm telling myself, even if it may be true in some cases, it's still your story. It's still part of you. Whether or not it's true in this moment, it still creates who you are and where you've come from. So we want to honor that. We don't want to just blow it off as it's just a story I'm telling myself, because that story is affecting our perception of our present moment, which will then affect our perception of where we can go, what we can do, who we can become. And I think that then allows us to feel like we have more choice in the matter. It allows us to move from a state of, oh my gosh, why is this happening to me? Which we've all been. I've been there, right? Why is this happening to me? And we move into a space of, okay, this is happening. So now what do I want to do with what's happened? Whether I have control over it all or not, it's a moot point. What do I want to do now that it's happened? How do I want to respond to this? How do I want to find meaning in this? How do I want to create purpose from this so that I can move forward in a way that's empowered and fulfilling? And when we say that's just a story we're telling ourselves, we often brush that off too quickly. We don't slow down for just a minute and make space for that awareness, make space for those connections, those ponderings. The most powerful tool for telling your story and co-creating your future is an empty page, a blank page, and a pen. You don't even have to be particularly intuitive. Definitely don't have to be psychic. Definitely don't have to be in contact with your guides, because this is the story of you. You are the expert of you. And you just have to sit down and make some space and start pondering it. Just start pondering, who is creating the map? Who in my story of me, which me is creating this map? Which me is writing this story? Which me is steering this ship? Is it the present me? Is it the past me? Is it the me that I want to become? Are they helping me get where I want to become? Whoever's driving this boat? All these questions that we can start to sit with. Maybe not come up with full answers, but just in the act of honoring any part of our story, whatever it may be, our dreams, our hopes, our desires, what's been, what's happened, allows us to live a life of greater depth that moves us from this place of just reacting to what happens to us into a space of responding. And that's a huge difference. Life unfolds very differently when we come from this place of response. Now, sitting down, blank paper in front of you, pen, simple enough. I'll just sit down and I'll write my story. Yes. And all good things are yes and. All good things. You're going to bump up against some challenges. One of the bigger challenges that I actually struggled with in my life as I went through all of the changes and all of the various stories, because while we have this full story, we all have these chapters in our lives that tell a very specific part of the journey where we enter the chapter and then we leave and we move on to something else. And so you reflect on that. There's all these different mini stories within the big story. And our stories are constantly changing. My gosh, nothing ever stays the same. Like if we could just have the same story, right? It'd be kind of boring, honestly. But some days when change is happening in its full glory, it's hard. So we're sitting down, we're writing our story, we're reflecting on our past, we're tapping into our present. We want to co-create this beautiful becoming. So we write all about who we want to become, and then everything changes. What do we do when it changes? It's interesting because this point, the challenge of this ever-changing story that we have, was actually the point where I got really stuck with creating Odyssey. When I first sat down, I thought, oh, wouldn't it be cool to teach like a spiritual development version of the hero's journey? That transformation, because it's so obvious and it builds like steps of a ladder. You're just going along and everything leads to the next thing and it leads to the next thing and things happen, but they've got this beautiful layout. Wouldn't it be so cool if we could use the hero's journey as that? This happens and then this happens and then this happens. And as we're reading the story and we're watching the hero's journey, we're all nodding along going, yes, I see, this makes sense. Yep, there are those connections. It's totally linear. You see the movement forward and we know that makes a great story. We know that we'd love to read and consume those great epics. And that's not how real life works. In real life, our stories don't do that. They're not linear. We don't always learn what we need to learn. They repeat things, they weave back and forth and go on top of themselves. And the challenge is that we're not reading it from an outside perspective. We can't see the whole picture. We can't skip to the end chapter. We just have to trust that we're going to get there. We're in it. We're actively having to navigate. And it's hard. It sounds easy, but we all know how hard it is to create something, to bring something to life. And how do we even navigate something when we can't physically see it on our dang map? Right? We were just talking about that. How parts of our map are going to be missing sections and they will fill in as we go, as we make choices, as we make decisions, as we learn things, as we feel things, as we connect with other people. That map will fill in. But then how do we navigate those parts that feel like they're blank? And I think that's where our spiritual breadcrumbs come in, our intuition, our spirit team. They start to come into our story and they start helping us connect those dots. We may not know where we're going in the moment. We may figure out like, okay, this is my destination and I have no idea how I got from A to B. Now I got to get from B to like E and I don't know how I'm going to do it. That's where our intuition comes in, helps guide us, helps create that. That's where our values come in. That's where our intentions come in. That's where our spirit team can come in and lend a hand. Help us get perspective. They're not going to tell you what to do or how to do it, but they're going to help you get perspective on it, right? That's why understanding kind of our big why, understanding our purpose, that's why all these things contribute to these spaces of unknown, these gaps in the map. And when we slow down and we reflect and we start to look at where we've been and where we are, we can harness the ability to imagine that we could become who we want to become. Because look at all the things that we did. Look at all the things that we've learned. Look at all those red flags we saw, all those things that weren't working, all those agitation points, all those times that we were stuck, and we did it. We moved forward. Even in the face of adversity, we moved forward. We learned, we grew, we evolved, and we did it, no matter how big, no matter how small. And there's something in that space where you make room to really think about that gives you the confidence to move forward into the unknown because you know you've done it before And this might be a different part of the ocean. This might be a different part of the woods, but you can do it again. You just meet yourself where you're at and you bring that awareness of who you were and who you want to become. And you just trust. You trust that you will figure out how to get from B to E using your intuition, using your spiritual compass, tapping into your guides, using that brilliant brain that you have, that amazing heart. And it's the space of reflection that keeps us from building on past versions of ourselves that don't feel right. I was working with a client not too long ago. It was a business client. I don't understand why this doesn't feel right. I don't understand why this should feel good. It's everything that I thought it should be. Why doesn't it feel right? Why doesn't it feel good? And what came up was that she was building her business on a past version of herself, a version that no longer existed, that when she started off on her journey was definitely there. And this vision, this business would have lit that version up. But she wasn't that person anymore. She had changed. Business had changed. Her life has changed. The world around her has changed. And so that dream she had, that business that she created, didn't feel right for her anymore because it was based on an old story, not a bad story, just a past story. And it wasn't where she wanted to go, and it didn't line up with her current intentions. It wasn't who she wanted to become. It was who she was, no longer. And so when we started to look at her past and her present and her future all at once, it became very clear that things needed to shift. They needed to change. They needed to have room to grow and evolve to meet her where she was at. And when we started to do that, by the end of our time together, she was feeling really good about it. It was like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Yes, that makes sense. All of these things would have led to what I used to want, but it's not what I want anymore. And so sometimes when we have everything that we thought we could want, or things are going really well, and we feel a little discombobulated, we feel still out of sorts, it may be that we've evolved, but we haven't evolved how we're telling our story yet. We haven't evolved how we're telling our story. And it's leading us to a place that just doesn't quite feel like it fits. And just the simple act of a blank piece of paper and a pen, sitting down in the present moment and like tuning in, being really mindful of what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what you're doing, creating that awareness around those things, figuring out what the story is currently that's unfolding. Is that the one we want to be unfolding? And if not, how do we want to co-create that? Where do we want our story to go? And what do we need to do now? Knowing what we've known from the past, having the power of the present right here. What do we want to do to shift that, to make changes so that things feel good, that they feel like they're coming from a place that's in alignment with who we know ourselves to be? That's the power of story. And while, yes, we can tell stories that are not helpful, we can still stories that maybe they used to be true and there aren't anymore. Yes, is that possible? 100%. Sure. And we can also take that and say, wow, look at how much I learned from that story. Now, where do I want to go next? Who do I want to become? What do I want my future to look like? And what do I need to do to get there? I love stories. Ugh, they're so powerful. So the question this week, let's do something fun and playful. If you were a book, what book would you be? And you can take that any way you want. You can take that into like what kind of book you would be. You can take it from a book you've read, be like, oh, this is my story. You can create your story, whatever. But if you were a book, what book would you be? What would the title of your book be? And where in your book are you right now? What chapter are you in? So there's a couple. There's more than one question. There's more than one question. If you were a book, what book would you be? What would your title be? And what chapter are you in? I would love to know. Please, please, please send me an email, find me in DMs. Let me know. I would love to know what book you are. I think that would be a fantastic, fun way. I might even bring that into the Spiritual Evolution Collective this month and then ask them, what book would you all be? I think I will. We have a live coaching call tonight, so I'm going to add that question to their lineup. So stories. There are so many good stories over on the Patreon right now, the Reclaiming Our Spirit Patreon. So if you haven't had a moment to check it out, definitely hop over there. The link is in the show notes. I even have included a ghost story from my time in the UK with Melissa. We went to afternoon tea and we found a very friendly sentient energy hanging out with us. And if you're wanting to explore your story more deeply, please reach out. I do have one-on-one packages where we sit down and we dive into all aspects of your story. And just to help you feel confident, be excited about things, excited about moving into the future, excited about who you want to become, get that clarity and get that perspective so that you can do phenomenal work and amazing things as you move into your becoming exploration. And on the next episode, we have an amazing guest coming on to chat about stories and the important part they played in her life and her business. And I got to meet her for the first time in the UK as well. So you get to meet her and hear her story. I have now gotten to give her hugs in real life too, which is absolutely wonderful. So I can't not wait for you to join us for that conversation in the next episode. If you're enjoying this podcast, please share it with your friends. Share it with the people around you. Spread the word. Let them know, hey, this episode, you might want to listen to it. That's how we all learn. The best things that come into my life are shared from people that I love and adore. So make sure you share. All right, y'all. It's been great. I can't wait to hear your thoughts. Make sure you reach out and let me know. Have a beautiful, wonderful week.
Thank you for listening to Reclaiming Our Spirit. To find out how I can help you reclaim your spirit, reach out to me at www.jessicapaschke.com. Leave me a message and I just may share how you reclaimed your spirit in the next episode.